Today we're talking about beef. Is it worse for the environment than owning a private jet? Can you even buy sustainable beef? And if you can, does it taste better than regular beef? My name's Gavin, I'm a food policy consultant and I've worked with organisations such as WWF, the European Commission and the Centre for Food Policy at City University of London. Every time there's a new piece of research about the environmental impacts of food, beef always comes out on top, but not in a good way. The environmental impacts of beef can be staggeringly high, yet at the same time Salt Bay's making millions of dollars by selling overpriced gold-plated steaks. Make it make sense. So what the hell is going on? I'm going to look at how we measure the environmental impact of beef, what kind of beef is actually sustainable, and lastly, where can I get it and what does it taste like? We always talk about beef as being the absolute worst food for the environment, and by most measures that is true. Food comes from all corners of the globe. Your bananas might have come from Ecuador, your prawns might have come from Thailand, and your green beans might have come from Kenya in the winter. Now, to compare the environmental impacts of those different foods requires collecting very detailed data and information from the site of production, which means if we want to compare a steak from Brazil versus one from Scotland, we need to get data from the farms in those different countries that has been created in an equal way to be able to compare it. That's really difficult to do. Scientists do manage to collect data on this kind of scale, however they normally study just one type of food. When some scientists come along and collect this data from lots of different studies, it's called a meta-analysis. The most significant of these is Poor and Nemechek's 2018 paper. They took 1,500 other studies, which they then reduced down to only 500, which were eligible to be cross-analysed, and that left them with data from 38,000 different farms. So they still had a lot of data to work with. In fact, the spreadsheet for this is like mind-bogglingly huge. However, there is a limitation to these studies. Because they're collecting so much data from so many places, it means they're limited to only the most common measurements of environmental impact, which means that the Poor and Nemechek study had to not include things like nitrogen fixation and runoff and manure management, which are quite important when it comes to measuring the environmental impact of beef. For example, this diagram shows you the things they were able to include and the things they were not able to include. Obviously, it's far more complex than I'm going to explain to you in this video, but if you Google Poor and Nemechek 2018, you can find all of this information for yourself. Because they standardized all the data, that means we can now look at examples between different types of food. So we're going to look at one. Now, we're looking at CO2e here, which is a collective term for all of the greenhouse gases that contribute towards climate change. And this is a slightly outdated measure. The way that they've measured it in this paper has been superseded, which would change the data slightly. However, the principle is still there. So how should we measure beef? Well, yeah, it's complicated, I know, as things in food always are. However, Eating Better have a framework they use that just give us an idea of 8 different criteria we should look at when considering meat. These are animal welfare, antibiotic use, greenhouse gas emissions, land use change, biodiversity, soil health, local pollution, and water scarcity. And WWF basically agree with this too. The range of CO2 values for tofu went from 1.4 up to 7.3, with an average of 3.2 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of tofu. Just remember that, 3.2, okay? Because beef absolutely blows it out of the water. It's got a lower value of 37.6, an higher end value of 269.2, and an average of 99.5 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of beef. That's 30 times the environmental impact of tofu. That's stupendously massive. And that's why we shouldn't eat beef. It's simple. That's enough science for now. I'm going to pretend I'm a normal person who knows nothing about food policy. I'm going to do a little bit of research as if I just want to eat a bit more sustainably and see if I can find out what kind of steak is best for the environment, and then I'm going to go and try and find some. So I started searching for the most sustainable steak and I started finding terms like agroecological, regenerative, grass-fed, pasture-raised, all these kinds of things, which, to be fair, I don't remember seeing any of those in the supermarkets. However, looking at these different guides that I found online, it appears I was on the right track, and even the Sustainable Food Trust, who do a lot of work in this area, back up that pasture-fed steak is the way to go. And then purely by chance, I bumped into Angus, our Isles event last week, and he was just telling me exactly this, how cows raised in the pasture, i.e. basically cows that get to eat fresh grass all their lives, or, well, not just grass, but all the other plants that are on the ground, who get to eat that all their lives as opposed to dried straw and things like that. That's the one we want to aim for. So we know we want pasture raised beef. So I'm going to jump on my bike and see if I can find some of this elusive pasture-fed steak. Ooh. Got the first one, but like literally I asked the guy a couple times, he didn't seem to even understand what I was asking him. So I've no idea what this is, but it was quite cheap. It was only $3.99. It's quite a big steak, so let's see what this one's like. So next I've come to Morrison's to see if they can do any better. They don't seem to have anything that tells you what it is, so I want to keep this consistent, so I want sirloin. I'm going to get this. Well, that really wasn't much better than the first butcher, so I think the next one, there's a butcher just down the road that I think has a much better range of meat. If not, then the next butcher that I know that has an even better range than this is another 2 miles away, and bearing in mind I live in like quite a busy part of London, that's a long way to travel just to buy a steak. Have you got pasture fed, pasture raised?
No, I've got a dry aged grass fed one.
Is that like your best one?
Best.
Yeah, can I just get like just one steak from that, please? So we kind of had some success. We've got a dry aged grass fed Scottish sirloin steak. Now that might sound like it's the best we can get, however it's not actually what I'm looking for, because grass fed doesn't mean it was actually raised in a field its whole life. It could have been fed on straw. Anyway, the point being we actually need pasture raised as opposed to grass fed, so we're gonna have to go to the other butchers. So I had to cycle another 3.5 miles to get to our 4th butcher, so fingers crossed we can do better here. Okay, so still can't find pasture raised beef. I mean, it's grass fed again, and we got some. Also, way expensive. This was 12 quid for a single steak, so like the prices are getting crazy. I'm giving up now on finding actual pasture raised, so we've got the 4 steaks. We're gonna go and see what they're all like, see what they taste like. Does it really taste better? So I've got back home with all of the steaks we're gonna test. Now, some of those were seriously expensive, and there's no way you could feed a family 4 on those unless you were earning a lot of money. However, the important thing now is, how good do they taste? Let's find out. So we've cooked all of the steaks. I cooked them all in exactly the same way. I let them come up to room temperature, and then maybe I should introduce you first. This is Uli, she's gonna help me taste the steaks. So we brought them all up to room temperature, and then I heated a pan to get really hot, and then I seasoned each steak before I put them in the pan, and then seared them for about a minute or so on each side. They cooked at different speeds because this one's much thinner and that one's much thicker, but they should be cooked more or less all the same. We're now gonna try a bit from each one. We don't know exactly which one's which. I put them on plates and I wrote on the underside of the plate a letter that refers to where they're from. So we're gonna try a little bit and then see which one's best, and then we're gonna look at the underside of the plate and then we'll know which steak is which. Okay, let's just dive in. So which one should we do on first? Should we yeah, let's go with that, okay. Tastes like steak. This looks well juicy. This has got a massive piece of fat on the edge of it.
It looks very beautiful.
That's way more tender than that one. That's kind of like melt in your mouth, you know?
It's more pleasure eating this. It's juicy, but very different from this one.
I feel that's got more flavour than the others for some reason.
It's the last one.
Last one, dive in. Those two that are quite thick, they feel like they're the most tender. That one had the strongest flavour. I think that one tasted really good. And I'm not sure about that one anymore.
Okay, I'll go for this.
You're gonna go for that one. Okay, that one is D. That is the most expensive steak. That is the one from the ginger pig.
I feel like I won a competition.
This one is C. So that is the second most expensive. That was from the butchers in Stratford. That is also grass-fed, dry-aged. Third place is B, that is from Morrison's. So that was the 3rd most expensive, and that's the cheapest. So you've actually chosen, so Uli didn't know which plates these were on, and she has literally chosen from the most expensive through to the cheapest. So I guess you can tell what cheap steak is compared to expensive steak.
Or you can use me.
Or you can just get Uli to,
evaluating steaks.
you get Uli to come and eat your steak for you, and then she can test it. Cool. You know what's wild is when I did the honey test a few weeks ago, Uli did that before we started filming, and she got that perfectly right as well, from most expensive down to cheapest. I have no idea what's going on. I think she might have some superpower. Anyway, none of the steaks were 100% pasture raised, so we actually failed to find what apparently is the most sustainable form of beef to have as a steak, which is a massive fail to start with. Now, according to much of the environmental data, if you do want to eat beef, then 1 steak a month takes you down to about 50 grams of beef per week, which is a sustainable amount to eat. You don't have to give it up completely. However, when we go through the prices, you might start to wonder if it really is worth it. Let's look at them. The local butcher charged £3.99 for a 245 gram steak. That's £16.29 per kilogram, which is very cheap, I think. Morrison's then charged £4.49 for a 227 gram steak, which is £21.98 per kilogram. The next butcher charged £7.83 for a 200 gram steak, and it had quite a lot of fat on it, and that was £39.15 per kilogram. Now, that was grass-fed, but it wasn't pasture-raised as far as we know. And then the last place charged £12.47 for a 252 gram steak, again with a lot of fat, and that's £49.48 per kilogram, which means if you had a family of 4 and you wanted to have a steak each, you'd have to spend about £50 on steak for 4 people. Like, who has that kind of money after the cosy lives? I can't even afford to do this test. One other thing that we've not talked about is the fact that red meat is linked to negative health outcomes, I think in particular the big C. So it's a good idea to cut down on how much you eat. Where we've arrived here is you either buy cheap steak that's really bad for the environment and bad for your health, doesn't sound so good, or you buy sustainable steak, relatively, that's also bad for your health and terrible for your wallet. And well, there's not really an option C, so I can't see any other conclusion other than to recommend basically not eating steak. Just doesn't really seem worth it as far as I can see. Maybe have one a year or something, celebration.